I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Thank you to everyone who tweeted at us in the last few days. Owen Power was the last number 1 overall pick to not play immediately after being drafted first overall.
Dude.
We knew we were forgetting somebody.
My phone blew up. I'm not kidding. I got 22 texts or WhatsApp messages from people in the hockey world like, Owen Power, you idiots, or some version of that.
Hopefully you didn't get called an idiot.
Well, some people, the tone of it was, you idiots. I don't think anyone explicitly said that, but some of them were like, Owen Power was just sitting right there. It was only a couple years ago. My point about that, though, is that like those COVID years, man, there's a little bit of a brain blur from what did and didn't happen. So that's why I'm giving us a mulligan on that one. Although, someone else suggested that we almost need like an Owen Power, like corrections and, things we got wrong corner on this show.
Yeah, that's fair. I did consider that as a possibility. If enough of it happens, maybe we'll do it. Let's not make it a habit, though. We'll try not to.
Well, we showed our work there. Like, I have no problem with that because we weren't saying, hey, this is definitive. Like, the conversation just led us. We got to the end of like a dark alley and we didn't know the way through. And when we tried to talk our way around it, like you and I were in the escape room there and we didn't escape successfully, but we did our best. Yeah, Owen Power.
And then I think Eric Johnson was the last guy before him. So like even Brian Berard was like, I wouldn't say way off, but like he definitely was not the right answer.
Right. Well, I mean, we got there. Thanks for everyone for listening. It's actually, it sounds weird, but it's almost like in a weird way, it's like strangely gratifying that many people are just randomly texting me and you, Owen Power. So just a sign of people out there listening to the show.
We appreciate you, 100%ers or whatever percentage you're at with the
22
show.
percenters. We love you too.
Yeah, we love all of you. Individually, equally, we all love you. Let's start with the free agent big board that you put together for The Athletic with a lot of great enticing names that could be hitting the free agent market as of July 1st. How long did it take for you to put that together, by the way?
It took a while. Part of it is obviously it's a pretty graphically pleasing offering, and I have nothing to do with that. So I can't speak to the graphics team or what happens on the editorial side. I'm sure it took them even longer, but to even conceptualize the list, do the kind of, I guess we'll call it diligence, but I mean, it's really just doing my job, get a sense of the free agent market and then write up all the blurbs. It took a little bit of time. It was a while in the making. But it's a fun exercise. And actually I find it helps focus me on what's to come a little bit too. I mean, obviously the names at the very top of the board, probably everybody knew were free agents, but there's some other players that you just maybe wouldn't be as consciously aware. And it's a way to look like, hey, my team needs a defenseman, here are the group of defensemen or a goaltender, what have you. So, it was a fun project. I'm sure we'll be giving it some updates here between now and July 1st. Plan is to get it out to 75 or 100 names eventually, but we had to bite off the first bit first. And that's, so you've seen our first offering of it. I think we did 8 big boards in the lead up to the trade deadline. I mean, there's obviously a little more movement there because trades happen and a lot more names come off, but I think you'll see a couple more versions of that until we get to the big day and then the market opens.
For sure. We don't have to go through all 50 names on this edition, but let's at least run through the top 5. And if there's other tidbits, if you haven't seen the list, you can read it at The Athletic. Number 1, Sam Reinhart doing his thing in Florida. Obviously, a spectacular season for him. Great postseason for him as well. Jake Gensel is in the top 5. Steven Stamkos is in the top 5. Elias Lindholm and Brady Shea also in the top 5. Any early rumblings on some of those names to start?
It's, there's a variation there, right? I mean, Sam Reinhart's still playing a big game tonight. So, his situation is maybe a little different than some others. I think with Gensel, there has been some hope that, Carolina might retain him after trading for him at the deadline. And it sounds as though they've, put a pretty good foot forward in negotiations. It's a big decision for him. I think he likes playing there. I believe he said that at the end of the season in his media interviews, but there's also the possibility this is your one time going to market and you're going to be, either the first or second or third or whatever it ends up being most attractive player on the market. And so as much as Carolina can entice you maybe with an 8th year on the contract, which teams can't do in free agency, I think that there's a bit of a trade-off in terms of waiting to hit the open market to get a real sense of what might be out there somewhere else, or do you just want to commit to the Hurricanes now? Stamkos is a big story, and my sense is that there have been conversations since the season ended. That's a departure in itself from the way the Lightning chose to handle this entire situation, putting off contract talks, entirely shelving them throughout the season, which we've been over. But since that time, I think there's some dialogue there on trying to find a way to make this work. And I think you still have two willing parties in terms of the team wanting to keep Steven Stamkos, and Stamkos obviously hoping to remain a member of the Lightning. But it's not as simple as that. We've seen Tampa lose a number of players due to the free agent squeeze, and they've since traded for Ryan McDonagh again, which is another $6.75 million added to their cap sheet. Very good player, but it seems to me that they're going to have to make other moves, maybe not even just for Stamkos. I mean, just as part of the due course of building out the team. And so can they get all that done in the next, it's under 5 weeks till July 1st, which is pretty crazy. Get your candidate plans ready. And for those of us in the hockey media, that's a pretty big day in terms of counting down to a little bit of a break. So, I think that one's kind of, I'd just say ongoing, but unclear how it's all going to fall out. And, I'm fascinated to see. I mean, one part of me is the sentimentalist in me is like, man, it's just hard to imagine Stamkos playing anywhere else and all that. But if he actually, if gets to free agency, I mean, it'd be pretty interesting to learn which teams, really prioritize him, make a strong pitch, what he prioritizes in this. I mean, this is a guy that's really got nothing to prove, right? He's got his 2 Stanley Cups and 500 plus goals, 500 plus assists. I mean, just a tremendous career. And so it's I'm sure a partly lifestyle decision for him and his family, but does he really want to chase a cup? Is it about, maximizing his earning potential? All those things. I don't know how that would fall. And I don't think his mind's quite there just yet. So, in terms of the names right at the top, that's sort of where we're at it. As I mentioned, Reinhart, he's still playing. I think he'd like to remain in Florida. Florida would like to keep him, but not a lot of time to negotiate when you're preparing for a game in the Eastern Conference Final.
Okay. I had a question about number 5 on the list, Brady Shea. I wonder what his situation will be, and I think this could also be a good way to loop in the Marty Necas angle to this as well, because it seems as if with Necas possibly being available, teams are checking in on him, and I've heard from Pierre LeBrun say that maybe Carolina would want an established player. Would it make sense, say, like, if Carolina realizes, you know what, Brady Shea, it might be a bit too expensive, we let him go to market, they would want an established defenseman in return for Marty Necas? Am I galaxy braining this a little bit?
No, I don't think they're locked in that it has to be a defenseman, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, in addition to Brady Shea, they've got Brett Pesce, who's a UFA and likely to depart as a free agent. So, the Hurricanes, for sort of some of the stability they've had, certainly the consistent regular season success and even early playoff success they've had, they're poised here, I think, to turn over a decent part of their roster between even guys like Jordan Martinook's a UFA, Teuvo Teravainen as well. I mean, there's a lot of different players that could walk out the door, Gensel, and they're also looking at possibly trading Marty Necas. So I think where they've established the bar is they want an established player, call it as you will, star-like quality. I mean, that's in the eye of the beholder, of course. I mean, Marty Necas has a fantastic package of skills, but he had 53 points last season. I don't know if we classify that as star level, exactly. And I think there's a lot that goes into that. I think a big part of that is why he's maybe welcoming or looking forward to the possibility of a new home. So I don't think you're galaxy braining it. Shea's going to get a monster contract. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to see him getting something like 7 times 7-ish on the market, something in that range. If he becomes, a total UFA and has the whole league to bid on his services. I mean, really useful player, put up a lot of points. Underlying numbers are strong. I mean, I just think that he's probably between him or Pesce or maybe Matt Roy in LA. I mean, that's probably the group of defensemen at the top of the free agent class. I mean, some of that is stylistic. They're not all, obviously they're not apples to apples in terms of what they bring a blue line, but I'm just talking in terms of, defensemen, Chris Tanev as well, should mention, who you can probably plug into a top four on most teams, who can, have played a lot of minutes and who are in the right age band, especially the first three guys I mentioned, to give a longer term deal to. So, I don't know how it's all going to shake out in Carolina. They do things their own way. And as much as that can be panned, I think makes them interesting. And it seems to me that, Tom Dundon's operating philosophy has been, if you don't want to be here, he's fine to let people walk out the door. He was fine to let Don Waddell leave. He was fine to let Don Waddell interview for the GM job in Minnesota years ago. And he still, retained his title ultimately as Hurricanes GM. So, it does seem to me that they value the players at a certain spot. And if if you want more, then go somewhere else. And as a result of that, they got tons of cap space. They're an interesting team when it comes to trades. They have a big trade piece in Natchez who has drawn a ton of interest right now. And they can also go out and sign other free agents as well. So I think that they have to be one of the main teams to watch, just because they have all of the elements there where they're obviously trying to win still. And they've got some notable guys likely headed out the door. And then the ability to bring some notable players back in to try and replace them. And, for Natchez, it sounds like, a lot of interest, whether it's Montreal's called on them, Boston, Nashville. I really think a lot of teams looking to upgrade themselves offensively see a player that maybe they could use a little differently than the Hurricanes did, that's maybe poised for a step forward, that could benefit from a fresh start. And, it sounds like if that deal gets done here, it's going to be a hockey type trade versus just, dumping a bunch of future assets for Marty Natchez.
Oh, and we didn't even mention the fact that Eric Tulsky, who is now the interim GM in wake of Don Waddell leaving, that's the man in charge of the Carolina Hurricanes offseason. You get dumped into, not necessarily dumped. It's not as if you came in from a different organization, but still getting promoted to this situation. That is another angle to follow.
Sure. And look, Tulsky was extremely involved in the decision-making that happened already on their hockey operations decisions. Where this is different is now he's the point person on those conversations with other GMs. It's not just him analyzing what might be good or bad. It's actually kind of being in the trenches, for lack of a better way to put it, to, mucking around, trying to get the deal to a certain spot, dealing with, I'm sure he's been around the league long enough. Tulsky must have relationships with a lot of these people, but maybe not, certainly not to the level Don Waddell did, just given how much more tenure he has in the NHL and has dealt with all the other GMs, for 20 years instead of, now 2 weeks. So, that'll be, you're right. It's interesting, but I'll say this: Carolina have not lost many trades in the last number of years. Every team's going to miss on the odd player or make a bad decision. I just think that, even the best teams are in that sort of position, but they've done a really nice job, and Tulsky's been part of that front office and part of a lot of those decisions. And that's why, look, they're our chaos team. Honestly, I think that they're the team that can really shake things up here between now and the draft, because I just think that they got a lot of moving parts and the new GM and it would appear right now probably the best trade piece, I'd say. It's not to say there aren't better players that might end up getting traded, but I think it's pretty clear that Natchez is very available. Whereas some other players, we'll see where it ends up. I think teams are listening on their guys, but aren't as committed to moving them. Whereas, it sounds like Natchez, really wants a fresh start. I think the organization is willing to try to give that to him if they can make a deal they deem fair.
Anything else you want to mention about the rest of the big board? The rest of the top 10 reads like this, by the way. Brandon Montour at 6, Jonathan Marchessault at 7, Matt Duchene at 8, Tuvo Teravainen, another Carolina Hurricane. There are a lot of them on this board, and Patrick Kane at number 10. I think one of the high-level takeaways is if you're out there and you're a fan of a team, there's not a lot of goaltenders that probably fill you with confidence. The top names are Laurent Brossoit, who had a great year playing behind Connor Hellebuyck in Winnipeg, Anthony Stolarz. You go deeper than that, you've got Ilya Samsonov is in the 50 spot on this board. After him, there's players like Cam Talbot. But, there's not a whole lot that you can be like, there's definitely a 1A, 1B option, definitely 45 good starts or pretty quality starts
in that player. And so, maybe the goaltending market as we go forward, I mean, my takeaway or my extrapolation of that in terms of the board is, we might see more goalie trades this summer just because I think teams that have to improve there don't have a ton of, they can't just go to the store and buy them. There's quite a number of quality forwards in my estimation. I think that there's a lot of good players for teams that say, or even just looking for a second line winger or something like that. I think that there's plenty of, options there, a little less on D, and certainly goaltending. You just don't have the guy that I think everyone's going to be chasing. Although I don't mean any slight at Boissois, because he's actually had 2 great years. If you look at his work in Vegas the year prior, and he might be someone that a team signs with the idea, hey, you've played 20, 25 games. Maybe you're a 40 game guy with our organization. That might be part of how he makes his decision as well.
Let me throw these 3 names at you, and I want you to order them in most likely to be traded to least likely. UC Saros, Jacob Markstrom, Linus Ullmark. Order them from most likely to least likely to move. All 3 could end up moving, but order them from percentage of in your head of who is most likely to be moved, traded to least likely.
I guess I'll go Saros, Markstrom, Ullmark. Remember, Markstrom has a full no move. Ullmark has limited no trade. He's got a certain number of teams. I don't remember the number off the top of my head that he can block moves to. I think Yaroslav Askarov has really emerged in the Predators organization. Saros is 1 year out from being a UFA. And I think Barry Trotz is another, newer GM who's looking to put a stamp on his team. And I think that that's not to say 100% on Saros. That I certainly am not implying that, but I think he's quite available if someone's willing to step up and make a big deal. Whereas Ullmark, it seems like New Jersey is a place that I could see them circling back now and trying to make that deal a second time or third time, depending on how you view what happened before the trade deadline. But, I don't think there's infinite number of places he's willing to waive his no move for. And then Ullmark finally, I mean, Boston's got a decision. They do certainly see a need to beef up their forward group and I think their offensive game specifically, ideally probably getting a center. They have to pay Jeremy Swayman this summer. And so there's only so much money to go around. Maybe Ullmark gets moved, but they've got such a great tandem there. I mean, that would be one of those ones you're biting your lip as you make the decision if you make it just because it's worked well. And you never know how a shift in dynamic, right? You're bringing another goalie with Swayman. Maybe it's not that they don't get along, like they're fighting, but maybe it's not as comfortable. Maybe, Swayman feels more threatened. I mean, I don't know how it'll be. I'm just saying, what you have right now is among the best in the league. So I think Ullmark is the least likely of them to move, although not, still very possible.
Yeah, I appreciate your quick thinking on that question.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, it was a hard one because it was the right question because there's not one clear answer to me anyway.
Yeah, look, we have to redeem ourselves after the Owen Power thing. Anything like this that makes us look good, we got to take advantage of that. As
long as I don't have to cut anyone or send anyone to the minors or make anyone a starter in this one. I mean, those are 3 great goalies, and the only reason they might get traded is because there's huge interest in them. It's not like the teams are looking to get rid of them.
Last opportunity before we go into the conference final series to mention anything I've missed from the free agent board or anything else you're hearing.
No, I think that's pretty good. I mean, we're only 2 days since the last episode. Things are, it's getting a little spicier out there, but I still think, a lot of teams are getting still kind of maybe looking at the puzzle big picture before making any decisions, even on some players. There's some players on the big board that I could see re-signing in their current teams that are, you've got them on the board because there's no contract done, but teams are still sizing up the overall landscape before wanting to commit to those players. And so it's May 30th. We've still got a little time here.
We absolutely do. Let's get to the playoffs. Which of these 2 conference final series intrigues you the most? Are you more into what's going on between Edmonton and Dallas or the Florida Panthers and the New York Rangers? Though obviously they're both great series, but if you had to pick one.
Maybe Edmonton, Dallas, because of the wild swings of momentum in the games. But I mean, you're seeing an element of that too in Florida and the Rangers series. So, I mean, I don't remember 2 conference finals simultaneously being this much of kind of a jump ball. Like from any given moment, I don't know who you could watch a 10-minute stretch and be like, that team is absolutely in the driver's seat in this series. And then, you probably felt that way if you're watching game 4 of Dallas Edmonton and you see the Stars up 2-0.
I felt that
early
way.
in the game. They're on the road. The building's quiet. That they got a chance to go home up 3-1. And then the dog in the Edmonton Oilers just came ripping out of that sweater. You know how they have that weird mascot that kind of looks like a dog or something, or like a wolf, or I don't know what it is, but
I forget the dog. I forget the mascot's
Hunter?
name, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
I think it's Hunter.
I think Hunter might be the name. I'll double check.
But like they sort of embodied this, whatever their mascot is there, and they just came in a wave and took the game back and found a way to get done. So, you watch game 3 in that series, right? Edmonton had a big lead, or like had all the play in the first period. In the second period, they didn't get a shot for like 17 minutes. Like, I just feel like it's really gone back and forth so much in that series. I really don't know what's going to happen in either one. As someone who's trying to plan to go cover the next series, it makes it a little, I mean, I'm certainly not complaining about this. The fact that it's compelling and up in the air is interesting, but it's hard to make travel plans. Cause like one minute you're like, oh, I better get hotels in New York. And you're like, really? So that's a very personal problem I'm sharing here on the pod, but it's a nice way of saying, like, I have no freaking idea what is going to happen in either one. I think they've both been great. But I'm maybe leaning a little bit more to Dallas Edmonton just because that one, it's gone like max in both directions where each team has had like crazy stretches.
By the way, Hunter, the mascot for the Oilers, is an anthropomorphic Canadian lynx.
Right.
So it's closer to a cat than a dog.
Well, their inner lynx came out in game 4. And I liked, it wasn't, I mean, obviously the big boys were part of it, but they got a McLeod goal and Connor Brown made a play. And like it wasn't just, McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, driving that comeback. That was, Janmark gets in there. So, it's like a series that's like hanging. It's like, I don't know which direction it's going to tip.
Like a pendulum.
We better get game 7.
I think we're going to get a game 7 out of this. One other thing.
What about
Darnell
the Rangers?
Nurse
Do you think they can?
Yeah, I still believe in the Rangers.
Can they keep riding the Shesterkin train here?
You need a goal. Look, I think Igor Shesterkin has been stellar for the most part, but I mean, look, the Florida Panthers look like they have everything too. Like they won't die. They won't quit. Like whoever comes out of the Eastern Conference, they have there's no slouch in either team. Like they're both built well. I know Florida's looked really good throughout the majority of this series, and some people feel they might deserve to be up 3-1 as opposed to the series being what it is. But like, I don't know. There's something about. I mean, Mika Zibanejad has to wake up, and Artemi Panarin both have to wake up. Like, what's going on with those two? I don't think Panarin's had a goal in a handful of games because Zibanejad doesn't have a point in this series. Sergei Bobrovsky has more points in the Eastern Conference Final than Mika Zibanejad. There are 2 players on the New York Rangers right now who need to wake up. It is those 2 players. So
right,
that has to happen. But I think you can
look at their track records. You're not betting against them. Like you're not saying
no.
Like if they could both have like 3 points each tonight, and I'd be like, yeah, that made sense. I mean, we knew that was coming. You couldn't keep them down forever.
Yep.
Sergei Bobrovsky wasn't going to outscore Mika Zibanejad for 5 games. There's only through 4. That was going to happen. I mean,
no,
that's the thing. I mean, this is probably the best conference final. And like, I should start looking it up. Like there's nothing in my mind. Sometimes you get to the 3rd round, a team sort of runs out of gas, right? I mean, remember Carolina got swept last year. Granted, they lost a quadruple overtime game in game 1. And that was probably a kick to the stomach. They never quite got over, but that does happen sometimes. Where a team gets this far and they just don't have anything left to give. But we got 4 top quality teams, 4 teams that people pick to win the Stanley Cup, like at the start of the year, at the start of the playoffs, like 4 teams that have been thought, like there's no surprises here, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. And there's some weaknesses maybe we could identify in the teams, but then like, if you want to point out some Oilers weaknesses, then I'll point you to their top players. And it's like in the entire history of the sport, players like Connor McDavid find a way to win a Stanley Cup. Like it's not always easy. Alex Ovechkin, it was not easy. He was 15 years in the league. Steve Yzerman was 13 years in the league. But those kind of players get there eventually. And so maybe this is what, like, look at Evan Bouchard's got 23 points. Like, some years 23 points leads the playoffs. He's a defenseman. He's young, and it's the third round, and he's going to, like, well on his way to 30 points in this playoffs, assuming they can play enough games. If they can get through this round, very much in play.
Scored a great goal in the other night.
Yeah. So it was, I think that this is probably the best quality conference finals like that we've had in my memory. But this might be our Owen power moment of this episode, and someone is going to be like texting us like, what about this year?
Yeah, what about this year? I mean, I'm sure Oilers fans are already gonna get at us about the way we characterize Hunter, but we'll leave that.
Do you remember the 2013 conference finals? It was the lockout shortened year, and I believe it was the top 4 seeds in the whole league. It was Boston and Pittsburgh, I remember, but the problem is Boston swept that series. It was 4 close games, and then I think it was Chicago, LA on the other side, I want to say. But did
that end in overtime? Did that Chicago LA series end in a game 7?
No,
there was an overtime goal, I want to say, or I'm misremembering.
No, I don't think it was that one. The problem is they played a few series. No, the one that ended in overtime was 2014. The next year, LA won in game 7 in overtime.
Yes.
But anyway, but my point is, like, even when we've had the 4 best seeds at times, like the 4 absolute best regular season teams in the conference final, doesn't always produce compelling conference final because, it's a weird game. But we might get 2 game 7s out of these series, and that feels about right.
Yeesh. Just looking back at it, Boston sweeping Pittsburgh. That's the year the Penguins, I think, got Jerome McGinley in that trade. He was supposed to go to Boston. He ends up going to Pittsburgh. Chicago beats LA in 5 games.
Right, but I believe those were the top 4 regular season teams that year, though. Like, there was a lot of anticipation for that conference final because it's like, wow, actually all the best teams get there. And then, this is really just underlining the point that it's not every year that it's this close, this tight, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where I'm going to be on June 8th. You tell me.
That's a great question. I don't have a crystal ball.
I can tell you.
I believe you.
I can tell you where I'm not going to be is Edmonton, because they would be the road team in any scenario. Mm-hmm. So that's the only place I can't be on June 8th.
That's fair. Darnell Nurse, what did you think of his postseason so far, and what do you think of how he handled his media availability earlier this week, which was very short and to the point?
I have no problem with him doing that. Like, that doesn't. He's making a statement. He's fulfilling kind of his obligation or his duties. He's coming up for the interviews. He was being curt but polite. Like, there's no, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And then he ended it himself. Like, I had no problem with it. I mean, look, he was making his own statement, but he wasn't, hiding behind the PR guy or saying, I'm not coming out or whatever. So, like, I don't mind it. Look, he's under a lot of fire. And, a lot of the criticism, I think, is, we talked about this a little bit in the John Tavares episode recently. Like, so much of it is filtered through what he's paid, right? Mm-hmm. If he's on a different contract, I think it's a different conversation, but, he's paid to be the team's top defenseman, and his performance hasn't been at that level. So, when the team gets down, everyone starts looking around for, well, why is this team down? And, his name came up for a couple days worth of articles and, talk pieces or what have you. So yeah, look at this is the playoffs. I think this is totally normal on both sides. And I really have no problem with him coming out and giving a little shade. And then, the Oilers went and won the game. I mean, that's the best response you can have. I'm not saying they won the game entirely because of Darnell Nurse, but winning does tend to cure all the things that might be out there that you don't like, whether it's narratives or, criticism or what have you. I mean, everyone shuts up pretty quick when you even the series.
Yeah. Well, another thing I want to get to from that series, it's the fact that Darnell Nurse was being carved up by the Edmonton Meat, as Kevin Bieksa referred to them the other night on Hockey Night in Canada. I have a theory about that. Like, a lot of people jumped to that clip and said, oh, this is how Kevin BX is characterizing all of Edmonton media, and people were pointing out specific names. Like, just listening to how he says Edmonton meat, and then he says, that's what I think of media. I there's a part of me that says that maybe Kevin Bieksa thinks of everyone in media like that and not specifically in that market, but maybe I'm stretching it.
Well, he needs a mirror then. I mean, he works in the media.
He literally just won a Canadian Screen Award this week for Best Analyst.
Right. But I'm just saying that, yes, he does a different job than a reporter who's day-to-day, on the ground covering the Oilers, at every practice saying this lineup change is happening. Like, his job is quite different. He's analyzing the sport from a studio in Toronto, but he's still part of the media. And
yeah, he is now. I think he thought that more, maybe because he was a player, and maybe that's what he thought about more as a player. And because we still see him in that lens, it's funny to see him characterize media this way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't take anything too personally. I don't know if it was aimed at me, but
me neither.
But look, I get why it's popular out there to do that. Like, I'm sure that satisfied a huge hunger on hockey Twitter of people who think we're all idiots and they could do the job better and all that stuff. Like, that's fair. Like, that's part of.
I think Mark Spector's trending on Twitter, actually. Funny enough.
That's part of the gig, though. Like, the same way the players, are open to criticism or discussion about their play. I mean, you or I are the same. There's a comment section on the bottom of the articles. People have free will to say, "Oh, another dumb take by CJ."
Reddit threads, those exist too. Don't forget about the Reddit threads.
Yeah, I don't live there, so I'm not worried about that. But
don't live there. Don't do it. Don't do it.
No, I mean, the thing is, everyone is actually allowed to have their opinion. It doesn't bother me, but yeah,
absolutely.
It was a little gratuitous is how it felt, but I'm not going to get too wound up. I don't know exactly.
No.
Like, it kind of came out of nowhere, right? Like, it was just a little quip. Like, it wasn't a flushed out thought. So, like, we're in danger of maybe thinking he meant more than he did or less he did. Like it's hard to interpret exactly what he might have meant there. But he was looking. He was taking the player side. He was saying Darnell.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's like, Darnell's had to deal with a bunch of shit, and he had to answer their stupid questions, and they're a bunch of idiots. Like, that's kind of what he's saying in different terms. But like, my counterpoint would be Darnell and all of the similar players around the league are paid to sometimes take some shit. They have to answer dumb questions. Like, it's literally in their contract that they have to help market the league. I don't know how it's exactly phrased, but I mean, doing interviews is part of the gig. There literally are media regulations that require teams to make players and coaches and available in these circumstances, because frankly, this stuff all gives us all something to talk about. Like, this is all part of the marketing machine of the league. So that just is what it is. Like, sometimes it's not great to be in the eye of the hurricane, I'm sure. And I feel for Darnell. Like, I hope not. Like, I didn't see all the criticism. I read a couple articles. Nothing I saw felt like overly personal, but I might have missed something. I mean, it's like, I feel like a lot of people were just talking about the fact that, the Oilers were scoring less, allowing more than they were scoring when he was on the ice, and he's playing big minutes and he's an important part of their team. And if they want to have success, he's got to drive better results. Like I felt like most of the stories were basically making a long version of that point. And I don't think that's an unreasonable point, but he's in a Canadian market. Everything's turned to 12 right now on the dial. And so, it should already be calmed down. It's 2-2. I don't know what today's story is. I'm not, I haven't seen any of our colleagues out there. I guess they're all making the long flight back to Dallas. So it's a long travel day, but, we'll be on to something else next. Stay tuned.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, look, Darnell Nurse has a cap hit of $925 million. He has 3 points this entire postseason. Of course, he's going to be in the eye of a storm. I don't have a problem also with what Kevin Bieksa said either. I just wondered if he specifically meant Edmonton media or if he meant all hockey media in general. But like, it's fine. Like, I don't think it's the end of the world. Like, he also is smart enough to realize he is part of the media game now with where he's sitting on Hockey Night in Canada. And he's very good at his job. So you're not going to hear us be.
Well, and also I worked with him for years. I like the guy. So like even on a personal level, like, I'm not coming for Kevin Bieksa. That would be dumb, first.
Yes.
But secondly, I actually really like the guy. I guess back to, he's entitled to his opinion. I just think he was defending the player. He's the former player on the panel. He's defending the player. I think that's what it is. And it's easy. Look, it's the easiest thing in the world to blame media. Like lots of politicians do it. Like this is normal. Like this is part of the gig. This is how it goes. It's all the media's fault.
Yeah, distrustful media. I'm not.
Well, I guess this is the point, though. Is like, does Kevin actually think that Darnell Nurse has played well enough? Like that would be I'd love to have asked him that. Like, do you think Darnell is playing fine then? Like, what's the media missing?
That's a good question.
Did you even watch the scrum? Like, it was short answers from Darnell.
I watched the scrum, obviously. The scrum, it was very short.
But the scrum didn't feel like, I didn't feel like they were like throwing fastballs at his head or anything. They were even asking him just broadly about the series and teammates and like, do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't 10 questions about like, how are you going to be better? Be better. Do you care?
Like, I thought that considering the amount of criticism that he probably should have gotten, I didn't think it was that bad at all. I mean, the one feed I saw was, I think it was off of TSN's website. I think the first question he gets asked was cut off. And it might have been a Philip Broberg question because people were wondering about him being in the lineup. He ends up being in the lineup for game 4. And his answer was short from there. And then the other questions after were pretty general. And then he says, you know what? I'm out of here. I thought he got off fine. And then Connor McDavid and Stuart Skinner were asked about it. And then Connor McDavid steps up and says, hey, he's a great player on our team. Like, considering the amount of money he's making, the production or lack thereof, he should be getting way more criticism, I would think. I don't think it's been that bad. Maybe on social media, people feel away and they're saying what they want to say. Or maybe I haven't seen enough too closely. I mean, I just got back from vacation. Sorry. But I think it could be a lot worse than it is right now.
Right. And also shout out the Oilers PR staff. This is very media nerdy, but on the day of a big game where they're down 2-1, you get Darnell Nurse speaking to reporters when he's under fire.
Yeah.
Philip Broberg spoke, and this was the first time he entered the playoffs, and at that point it wasn't 100% confirmed he was in, just looked like he was in. You got McDavid and Skinner. Usually you don't get the starting goalie and the best player. I mean, they were down 2-1 and going into that game. That's usually where a team would start hiding the sort of central figures of the storylines. And they all spoke yesterday. I mean, that's shout out to Jamie Cartmel and the Sean May and the PR staff out there in Edmonton, because seriously, like that's how it should be. And that helps fuel all these stories too. And gets, also puts the media in the firing line from, prominent hosts on national broadcasts.
Yeah. Shout out to, is that your stick tap for this week? Are you
no,
giving it to the Oilers?
I thought about saving it for the stick tap, but I have another one. So I'm just going to, we're spreading a little love now, Julian.
I love the idea of spreading love.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. We're lovers on this show.
And honestly, it
just
really
in
is.
terms of general
I think it's good for the game to have all those players talking. So
absolutely. One other thing from the conference finals, what did you think of the Matthew Tkachuk, Chris Kreider back and forth, which almost resulted in a chucked mouthguard into the stands? It was not thrown into the stands. It stayed on the ice from Chris Kreider taking it from Matthew Tkachuk. But apparently, I didn't realize this. But had it gone into the stands, the refs could have ejected Chris Kreider. I didn't know that was a rule, and there are some people who wonder if that rule would have been enforced. But I thought that was just a fun little quirky moment.
Well, you can put me down for, I don't think it would have been enforced. I think the main reason for that rule is because you don't want players throwing sticks into the crowd, which would be the most obvious, piece of equipment that could easily get thrown by an opponent into the crowd if you're trying to stir it up, and would obviously
that's happened before,
and it would be unsafe. And so I think that's really what the rule is primarily there for. And I think if a player did throw an opponent's stick into the crowd, I believe that player would be ejected from the game. I can't imagine a mouth guard as gross as that would be if you're sitting in the second row and it lands in your lap beside your pretzel and your beer. You might be like, this is kind of gross, but
imagine if it lands in your beer. Well, imagine you're just minding your own business and then
if it lands in your beer, you're going to get 15 minutes and then some of fame. You're going to be on Sports Center. You're going to, you're probably going to be like giving the mouth guard back and getting some memorabilia for it. Like,
oh yeah.
Matthew Tkachuk seems like the kind of guy who might send like a couple beers down to you during the game to make up for it. Like, I think that would be almost fortuitous if it landed in your beer. Anyway, I digress.
As long as you don't like chug the beer, don't be the idiot who, if that happens to you, you're like, oh, I'm just gonna chug this beer with this mouthguard. Don't do that.
Well, do what you're gonna do. I wouldn't do that.
No, don't do the no. That's like other people's fluids in your drink. That's gross. Are you saying you would do it?
I'm saying I wouldn't do it, but I could see someone.
Oh, thank God.
Yes. No. Don't worry.
If whoever does that, disgusting.
No.
Absolute disgusting.
I would draw a line.
Don't do that.
If that was my beer, there's no way.
No way.
But
no.
Anyway, it was an entertaining moment. I've enjoyed the back and forth since, where Tkachuk said it was the only good play he made in the game.
That was such a funny quote.
Which is a good. I mean, this is a pretty good quote series between Paul Maurice, like doing the stand-up routine every day, and Tkachuk never hides from the mic. So I didn't have any problem with it, and it's a big Game 5 here coming up on Thursday. Just obviously, Game 5 gives one team that wins it a chance, at least 2 chances to close out the series, and I don't know. It's Madison Square Garden, man. Best arena in the world, or whatever they call it.
I
world's most famous arena.
Yeah, world's most famous arena. I love it. I love that arena, the Bell Center for sentimental reasons, but like even compared to the Bell Center, like there's some kind of like weird chill that comes over you when you're at MSG that I don't know how many other arenas or stadiums in the world you could replicate that feeling at. Maybe a larger soccer stadium or an NFL stadium, but just there's something special about being at MSG. It's really difficult for me to explain, but just getting that experience earlier this year covering a Rangers Flames game, like I felt like it's really difficult for me to explain. It just felt like such a special moment.
Yeah, it's a vibe, man. And they put like $2 billion into an old arena, so they paid good money to give you that feeling. The roof is spectacular. It's kind of cool to go upstairs to the arena floor. There's a few other buildings like that, like Boston is on an elevated level, but it's unique in every way. I loved even the interview Sean McKenzie did walking up the ramp with Tkachuk before one of the games this week. So it's going to be cool. Let's see Game 5.
Before we get to stick taps, any thoughts on the ending of the PWHL season? Minnesota, they started off as the low seed. Toronto picked them in the first round. They end up reverse sweeping them after being down 2-0 in their series. They end up winning the Walter Cup, the first ever in the PWHL. Any thoughts on how the season went? I don't know if you got to watch many of the playoff games, but just a general couple moments on how this first season went for them. I got to admit, I thought not having team names would be detrimental to them, but they found a way to make it work and surpass a ton of expectations.
Right, and they have team names as of August. So, I mean,
yes.
That was literally just because they didn't have time to pull it all together. It was awesome. It was so cool to see the trophy celebration, to see the emotion. I mean, for Minnesota too, I mean, 3 nights earlier, they thought they scored the championship winning goal in overtime. And then, they're all celebrating, throwing their gloves around, and then a correct, but still a goaltender interference video review brings that goal back, and they lose to Boston, goes to Game 5. So, I mean, for them to get it done after that is pretty cool. Hard not to look at Kendall Coyne-Schofield, who was so instrumental individually in helping this league become what it is, to be the first captain to lift the Walter Cup, to have her baby on the ice, crying there, and all the team photos. You can see everyone trying to get him to relax a bit. So it was a cool moment. And I think it was like a 15 out of 10 success. Like I don't, nothing is ever perfect, but I would struggle really to find what could have been better. I mean, from the amount of support the teams received right from day one, the TV broadcasts were first class. Cheryl Pounder, Kenzie Lalone did awesome on the TSN broadcasts of the final series. If you caught any of those games, the players were great. I mean, I just feel like somehow, and I don't mean somehow, but just given that they pulled it together in a matter of weeks or a couple months, it was a smashing success first season. And what's great is next year you'll have team names, you'll have, obviously different designs on the uniforms. You're going to have a longer regular season. I think it's going to be 36 games instead of 24 games next season. Like they're literally growing in every way as they move forward. And you got to start somewhere, but man, what a starting point they delivered.
Absolutely. And I can't wait until the league expands and gets more teams, hoping for one in my market and other markets. We'll see it definitely in other markets in the States as well. Just
5 years.
full marks to the PWHL.
My prediction.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think
5 years.
I think that they'd be worried about too fast, too soon, but who knows? I mean, you can have a plan and then someone comes along with a lot of money and says, hey, I'd like to pay you this amount of money to get a team here. Maybe the plan changes, but I think it'll be a few years yet before it expands, but the original 6 was pretty cool.
Yeah. Do you have a stick tap for this week?
Yeah, I'm going to take Kendall Coyne Schofield. It was a first-class person. I don't know if you saw the photo. It said, like, frame it. It was on the official PWHL account with her at the Walter Cup and her reflection in the trophy.
That's cool.
It was pretty cool shot. And, you know, a lot of players deserve this league, and a lot of players wait a long time. Unfortunately, some players almost aged out of their competitive windows and weren't able to see it through. But, you know, Kendall in particular was front and center going back through everything that happened that led up to this. And so hard not to give her a stick tap that she's the first captain to lift that trophy and, you know, win it. So good for her, and pretty incredible that her son's only 10 months old, I believe. And she somehow played this season as a brand new mom as well. I can't imagine balancing those two things, but, you know, she's first class in every way, shape, and form. And I know a lot of people were pulling for her to be the one to do that.
You know what? I'll jump on that and give it to the entirety of the Minnesota team, mostly on the back of that playoff format where the top seed can pick who they want to face in the first round.
Okay, they would have faced them though if you didn't pick.
I know, but like, I love the fact that it worked out this way, because it could have easily worked out where Toronto could have won that series, and then we're looking at that and thinking, oh, well, the top seed's just going to win all the time. They'll just pick the lower seed. I love the fact that it worked out this way, because it just reinforces the fact that anything could happen in the postseason. We say that for the Stanley Cup all the time, and now we can say that for the PWHL too. I love it, obviously, because, you know, the league is great, but for that format, now you think twice about it, or maybe you go about picking the lower seed in either case, but it is just going to reinforce the fact that it is not a foregone conclusion that that top seed will beat out that lower seed. You never know.
Toronto had a 2-0 lead too in that first round, and Minnesota rallied with 3 straight wins. So they were resilient. They came back in that series, and then came back from their false celebration. And did you see the one clip going around? Is like, what happens if they didn't win? Oh, we'll never know.
Yeah, we'll never know.
They recreated that meme I saw, so that was pretty good.
That's funny. I gotta look up that meme. Yeah, the great stick tap, and great week of episodes. We'll be back next week with more CJ Show. Get your questions in through Discord, Twitter. I don't know if you take questions via P.O. Box. Maybe if we did this show 20 years ago, you would.
Owen Power!
Yeah,
I wonder if anyone sent us mail, just wrote Owen Power. Those will arrive next week.
Yeah, does the STPN have a P.O. box? I mean, I'm sure they have some kind. I mean, do they really have a P.O. box? Do they get fan mail? Has Steve ever gotten fan mail before? Like literal fan mail?
I mean, they have,
like, people sending him letters.
We have a studio, man. I'm sure there's an address for it. I don't know if it's publicly
There
available.
is, but like, I don't know if that's like something they big up and like make public. What producer Jesse is using the okay, people send things to the office all the time, so they do. I'm not that nosy. Like, I've only been in the office like a handful of times. Like, I don't know what they get.
Well, it does not surprise me. I mean, people like are showing up at Boston Pizzas and like bringing their kids to meet Steve. So I'm sure someone has written a fan letter. Is all I'm saying.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't know. I mean, people. I'm glad we still live in an era where people like to send letters. It's nice. It's fun. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's episode of CJ Show. We'll be back on Monday. Peace, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.